Hello, everyone. Joan, Leona, and Jocko over here from the Grace and Truth Marriage Enhancement podcast. So we're excited to get this podcast started. Hope that it'll be beneficial to you. So right now, we're going to get into the episode. We'll see you on the other side. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Grace and Truth Marriage Enhancement podcast. So this is our very first podcast, and I'm here with my wife, Leona. Let me say hi, Leona.
Hello.
And so how we want to start this off is really just want to really briefly talk about ourselves, who we are, how we met and got here. Let's go ahead and get started. So we grew up in Nigeria, and our parents were best friends. And you want to talk about the girl next door?
Well, I think it's interesting that we would be here doing a podcast for everyone because all we were little kids that lived in the same apartment building, and it was a small apartment building. And you were the boy that lived upstairs, and I lived downstairs. And so we like to tell the other people when they ask how we met, that you were the boy that lived next door, or I was the girl that lived next door. So that's our story, how we got started.
Yeah. So just a little bit of backstory. Our fathers came to the States to get an education, and they met our mothers. And they met our mothers. They got married. And so our fathers were friends, obviously when they came here. And so when they got married, the independence, in 62, our parents went back. And that's really how, of course, you became the girl downstairs and I was the boy upstairs. And so I can just remember the picture that we had, where you were dressed up in traditional outfit, and I was dressed up as a cowboy. And so my grandfather had come to visit, and he had brought me a cowboy hat and a pair of 6-shooters. And so we have this picture, and I may show the picture in the podcast, but maybe not. Who knows? And but that's really where our beginning. And we laugh about you being the Nigerian and me being the American. And so it's just interesting how you look back and you see how God ordains things. And you look back in your life and you see, you don't really understand what's going on at that point, but you look back and you see how God's hand, right, is orchestrating things. And so I know that's always a picture that we go back to. But so when we were there in Nigeria, we used to play house. So
Yes. And to this day, I think I'm still a little confused about what a house is actually, because I've heard different concepts of playing house. But for us, we just put your mom's cushions together and built basically little forts that we would climb in and out of and go through. And it was neat. It was fun. It was our imaginations being put to use. And of course, I didn't have much of an imagination, but that's an inside joke that maybe you guys will grow to know at some point. But it was fun, and I know that you didn't necessarily want that. You didn't care for that because I was a girl, and you would have preferred to be playing with little boys and playing with your 6-shooter. And doing the not so politically correct Western thing. And we'll just leave that right there. But that being said, I thought it was fun that we were crawling through our fort and trying not to knock down the cushions, knocking down the cushions, having to rebuild. Ironically, we ended up doing that later on in real life, rebuilding
A few times.
a couple of levels
Yeah.
too. So spiritually, definitely, as well as our souls, and then with physical houses. But yeah, that's what we did as kids. That's how we played, even though you were disgusted at having to play with a little girl. So
Yeah, it wasn't that bad, but again, at that time, we didn't really know. We were playing, right, and so we didn't really have too many, other friends around close by, and so so we played and had a good time. I think we had a good time at it. And then, of course, Biafran War started, and then I had to leave. My father was on a quote unquote hit list, as people probably look at that today. And so we had to leave and left you behind. And I went to Uganda for a couple of years. And how was it for you when you stayed behind?
I just remember a day coming home and not really sure where I was, but wanting to go upstairs to go and find my friend, and my mom saying, Joe isn't there. And I didn't understand. So she explained that your family had to leave. And so I remember being confused, because it was like, they're always there. You're there. Your mom was there. Your dad was there. And all of a sudden, you guys are gone, and you're gone for days. So it did not make sense, obviously, till I was much older. But we lived through bombers flying overhead, me diving under my mom's piano seat whenever the planes were going by, and being terrified. And seeing newspaper articles that were just horrifying of what was going on in the eastern part of the country. And so it was very traumatic in many ways. Number one, suddenly losing your friend. Number two, hearing planes, and being told those are bombers. When you hear them, you need to get under something right away. And having very little control as to what was going on, and very little understanding until much later. So it was tough.
Yeah, I can't imagine living through that. I know that the day that we left, there were tanks rolling through the city streets, and very, in here in America, we've never had those situations, happen. But it is, traumatizing when you see those, because your whole world's turned upside down. You don't know what's coming next. So I think, one of the things with Americans, they ought to be very blessed that they've never had to suffer that a lot of other people in other countries have had to go, through that civil unrest. And obviously we had our own civil unrest here, in the 60s, but it's not like the same as Civil War. And so fast forwarding that, we come to the United States, and so you're still in Nigeria, and my family's here, and I would say ironically, but in the Lord, there's no ironically, right? And our grandparents lived in the same area, and so just us being away from each other for those years, and then having the encounter that day when you call, and the person that you hadn't seen for a while was on the other side of the line.
Yes, the irony of ironies. And as you have said, well said, what the Lord does that we have no idea He has planned in advance for us. I'm reminded of the scripture, I believe it's in Acts, where God says that He has placed us in certain locations on the earth for certain times. And so the fact that my family relocated from Nigeria to the U.S., And as you rightly pointed out, both our moms are American. So it was just interesting that my mom would say to me that day, why don't you call, look in the phone book and see if you can find Joe's grandparents and give them a call and see if you can find out what's going on with them. And part of it was an exercise in me learning how to use the white pages. I always struggled with the yellow pages. I don't know what that just that bit of my mind just I couldn't understand the logic behind how the yellow pages were organized. White pages, no problem. And of course, this is foreign language to those Americans
The yellow
of the younger
pages that
generation.
weighed 40 pounds.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So I looked and called that day just to see, if I could connect with your grandparents. And lo and behold, you answered the phone. And your mom, who your family had actually moved back to Nigeria by then, your mom happened to be in town visiting with your sister. And it was really ironic that you would have picked up the phone. And so we chatted for a little bit. You called your mom over to the phone, and our moms both talked and then scheduled very quickly to see each other. And so I can't remember how long it took, but we came over. I don't know if it was a day, but we came over and visited, and you made sure to be at your grandparents that day. I'm sure your mom asked you, you haven't seen your friend in so many years, and you were probably like, yeah, that girl that lived downstairs. That's my imagination, of course.
Yeah, it was an interesting time in terms of that, because I remember you saying that you had, before you came over, you had actually seen my dad.
Yes.
And so that time when I came over to see you, my mom had come back and visited, and basically when my parents left, I won't go through the whole thing, but when my parents left, I went through some really difficult times, and actually spent some time out on the streets, spent some time in friends' homes, and just a time when I was just really lost and my world was turned upside down. And so it was interesting at that point when we met for that brief time, that it took me, before we came back around again, right? There was just really some up and down traumatic times in terms of that. And I remember going back to Nigeria after high school and really feeling lost, because when last time I'd seen Nigeria was the 60s. And Nigeria, to me, I had this, picture in Nigeria of how beautiful Nigeria was. Right. And that was right after the British left, and everything was clean, and it was really a tropical paradise. And then to go back when I did, which was, middle, late 70s, after the war, just seeing the ravages of war there. So I couldn't wait to get back. But got back, went back right into the same situations that I was in. And that's when we actually meet up again, because that's when I take, you and I had our first date to go to the drive-in. And I'm sure you have some memories about that one.
So just to help people connect the dots, when you said that I had seen your father, we had seen your father, meaning myself and my older sister had run into your father in Lagos, Nigeria, and unexpectedly. And it was soon after our father had passed away. And he explained that he had come back to Nigeria and had a job. And so your family would be moving to Nigeria. So fast forward back to me picking up the phone that day to call your grandparents and to hear your voice. And my mom asking, to find out, basically where you were, because she understood that you had not gone back to Nigeria with your parents. So that was when we realized that your mom was there visiting, and had the quick little, we made the trip over to your grandparents' house and saw her, you, and your sister at the time. But yes, you had gone through quite a bit of turmoil in your life. You're describing a time, which I think the word we would use is where you were homeless, or you were couch surfing.
Couch surfing.
That's the term, if you will, that people use at this point in our culture. But yes, I didn't understand that at all when we connected at that point. But you were someone that my mom trusted, and I felt somewhat comfortable around. There was nothing I had to explain. I didn't have to explain my accent. I didn't have to explain anything about that. You already understood it, so it was easy. So when you invited me to go to the movies, which was my first date technically, right? My mom gladly said yes, again, because she felt like she could trust you. And then you took me to go see a Clint Eastwood movie. And I remember being somewhere between disgusted and dismayed. I don't know if there's a feeling word behind that, because I had my own personal history behind the whole Clint Eastwood thing. It was pretty much, my father was as Nigerian as he was entirely into Westerns. And he would take us to the theater to see Westerns. And I was bored to tears. But here we were looking at a Clint Eastwood make my day type of movie. Like, what are we doing here? Was my thought. But it was my first time at a drive-in theater. And I think that was really why you took me, was because you're like, oh, you've never been to a drive-in theater? Okay, well, I'll take you to a drive-in theater, which was really neat of you. But it wasn't a great experience, I hate to say, with the fake barbecue beef sandwich meat. And the what do they call those things that sit in your window? The speaker box.
Okay. Yeah, that sits in your window.
That sits in your window that you ended up running into with the.
Yeah, in the back, I ran into the pole. Yeah, but I'm sorry you didn't like the barbecue beef sandwiches, because drive-in was the only place you could get the perfect barbecue beef sandwich. But that date was interesting, and then from there again, just sort of flashing forward, because really through after that time, still was kind of doing the couch surfing thing, and didn't really. Only a few people knew. I mean, my parents didn't know. At that point, my parents left. I know that I really caused them some harm, because I had no contact with them. So I know for long stretches, months, they had no idea of where I was, whether I was alive or dead. And so, until years later, I didn't look at it from my side, from their side, and say, wow, that was a lot of pain and trauma. I know that I must have put them through. But so, we fast forward, though, to the prom. And I'm going to let you tell that, because I don't know whether my memory is fuzzy because of trauma or not, but you have a better memory of that one than I do.
Well, I think it's interesting that we're doing what we do, and why we're sitting here to do a podcast, because when you talk about the trauma of your parents, you also experienced a lot of trauma, and the trauma of abandonment really was very present. And in a way, it was almost like we say, a cleansing stream. They rejected you, so you rejected them, right? And so you had that feeling, which is why you were able to go for months at a time without contacting them and them not knowing where you were, but they didn't know how much pain you were in. And I didn't know how much pain you were in.
Yeah.
Nobody really knew how much pain you were in.
No.
So relationally, you didn't have a way, and you didn't have a relationship with the Lord. So it was difficult. So being able to get the needs met that you had, because every need that you had, literally from shelter to even being able to express the pain in your heart, they're all legitimate. They're all God-given needs. And so I think it's important that even as we talk about our past, that we process through those things and talk about the fact that we're now connected to the things that God has been able to do for us to help us become aware that it's not a matter of being needy. It's a matter of the fact that God created us with legitimate needs.
Exactly.
And he meant for us to have needs met. Now, we're not talking about things that people call needs these days, like I need to get my nails fixed. Well, that's not quite a need. That's more of a want.
That's a want. Right? Although some people go, no, you don't understand. It's a need.
Exactly. But having to have shelter and food and a place to stay and relationship and kind of warmth within the family, bonding within the family, those are legitimate needs. So anyway, you again, I think you were being my knight in shining armor, and you took me to my first drive-in, took me on my first date, and you offered, because just in conversation, it was literally just chatting back and forth, you learned that I had a prom coming up and I had no one to take me to the prom. And so you offered to take me to the prom, and that was really awesome. And so in the months leading up to that, I think it was, we saw each other in the fall. And so by January, my mom had bought my dress and she asked me, have you heard from Joseph? And I was like, no, I haven't. So I think by March, she was like, well, you need to make sure that you guys are still going to be able to go, so I can, hem the dress and do the things that I need to do to make the dress fit properly. It was a store-bought dress, but it still needed some adjustments because I'm so tall. Or as they say, I am vertically challenged.
Yes.
So in that, I tried calling you a couple of different times and I couldn't get a hold of you. And so we went into, in my household, a little bit of a panic and wondered, well, what are we going to do? My mom's thinking, my daughter is not adjusting to life in America very well. She's still very Nigerian in all of her ways. We need to help this child. She goes to school, she comes home, she goes to choir practice, and that's it. So, she thought, well, maybe your sister's fiance, you're actually, no, I think they were married by then. Your brother-in-law can take you. They were married by then. And so we started making plans for my brother-in-law to take me to the prom because we didn't know where you are. It's like you fell off the earth.
Right.
You came on the earth and then you fell off the earth. And so at the end, I ended up going with somebody else, but you called me, I think within 2 weeks of the prom and explained that you weren't going to be able to take me. And I was like, yeah, no kidding. And it was because you had been in the Marines and you could not get the time off. But I tell everybody that you stood me up for the prom.
Yeah. Yes.
That's the real story,
Yeah.
the depth of the story, all the way to the end of it. Yes.
Yeah.
It was really because you were serving the United States military.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you're a reservist, you have 2 weeks in the summer that you have to serve, and they don't really tell you until you get close to that, right? And so that coupled with, the same thing when we're talking about the couch surfing and all those things, my life was very, very unstable at that point. And so there were times when I didn't know where I was going to be, from day to day or week to week. And so it was definitely not the kind of life style that you have if you're going to, be dating somebody, right? And
So let's talk about that a little bit. You talked about the fact that your life was topsy-turvy at that time, and it wasn't stable enough for you to be dating. Well, these days, before I say that, go back a little bit. This was in the day where there was no cell phone.
right,
So it wasn't like you had the capability to just call me on your cell phone. And there was no state giving people who were below a certain income threshold a free cell phone.
Right.
There was no such thing
Right.
back then. Those level of social services or socialism, if I may say so, did not exist. And so you were dependent upon the kindness of whoever it was you were staying with to a certain degree. You wouldn't want to abuse that, right?
Sure.
As well as the fact that you had to have coins if you're going to use a payphone. Because we
Absolutely.
had payphones back in those days
Absolutely.
to be able to make calls. And if you only had so much to be able to put gas in your car
Exactly.
and be able to buy yourself maybe one meal a day, that was it.
Exactly.
And so it's interesting, though, that we have people who will date that are not stable. And I think the Bible has something to say about that. It says something about, do your work first, right? And I may be quoting that really badly, before you begin to consider a relationship.
Sure.
Get your work situations settled.
Sure.
Know what you're doing. Be bringing in the income. Have a bank account before you actually go and bring in another person into your life. And so I think the Bible has great wisdom. But of course, we didn't have that wisdom back then. Not because the Bible didn't exist. We're not that old. But because we just didn't know the Lord.
Yeah.
How much pain would we have saved ourselves? Or how much pain would we have been saved from?
Yeah. Well, I think too, when you talk about that idea being from Scripture, in earlier America, definitely up until the '60s and the social changing, that was still very much the way things were. I mean, a young man went off to college and he got his degree, and many times they got, they may have gotten married in college or whatever, but there was a specific plan, for that young man, and he was going into that, whatever profession that was, and so he was preparing in a way to have a bride and have a home and build a home together, and so traditionally, yes, that's very true, and that would have been great. I would have loved to follow that path, but again, talk about just the providence and of God. One of the things I didn't talk about was when I got into that situation, a friend of mine, one of my best friend, went to Marine Corps. And when he came back, he was radically different, right? And so I had seen that change in him, and I knew that God didn't want me to live the way that I was living, even though I hadn't, I wasn't following God, I still knew of God. And I just felt like he didn't want me to live that way. And so I went to the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps actually gave me the things that I needed, right, to come out and to know about honesty and integrity and values and those kind of things. And so again, just amazing how the Lord works, because if my parents had not left, definitely I would not have been going to the Marine Corps, because, I would have been at home, and, my father would have said, okay, you're going to go to college, and, and I'd be at home and doing that. And then I wouldn't have had any need to go to the Marine Corps. But because of where my life was there, right, again, God's hand moved me into a place that he knew that I needed to be. And so, so let's fast forward even more. Right. So you've now gone to college, right? And you're in college. And I think, as you said, you were in your feminist phase, right? And that becomes actually our third encounter, really, at that point. And so what do you remember from those times?
So just to be clear, I'm going to go back a little bit and just say, when I brought up the whole idea of what the Bible teaches about settling your affairs, getting your work together, definitely no dig on you. There was not a dig on my husband. I just want people to hear that. Yeah. The reason I bring it up is because the Bible has wisdom for us, and we didn't tap into it, period. Mm-hmm. I didn't tap into it for myself either. Yeah. So guess what? Yeah. No shade being thrown.
Yeah, and we weren't there. That wasn't our mindset at
Absolutely. All. But I think that it's beautiful that that as you talk about having to join the Marines, and not so much having to join it, but knowing in a sense you were being pulled in that direction, how that opened you up, particularly to the gifts that God gave you specifically. Because had your parents stayed in the U.S. and your father made you go to college, you would not have exercised the giftings with your hands and the skill that God gave you, and you would have been in a box that didn't necessarily fit you. Some of the top people in our culture that we point to in secular culture are people who did not necessarily go, quote unquote, go to school, or they went to school and they were like, okay, this isn't for me. I have something else that I'm called to do. And so I think that the Marines has a lot to do with having influenced your life in a great trajectory. Absolutely. Even helping you to reconnect with the Lord, so to speak. And I think it's interesting too today, now that we are dealing with a nation where there will be registrations of young men when they become able, that it's not all bad. And there could be a lot of good from that, because not everybody is meant to be sitting in a classroom, and not everybody can listen to somebody drone on for hours lecturing them, and not everybody can program, and do things with the computer. So I think God has some things in store for us as Americans that maybe many of us might be lamenting on at this time. But God is good, and He did in you what He needed to do. And in me, He showed me in college some things that I thought were going to mark my life in a particular direction for the rest of my life. I'm a woman, I've got a voice, and the whole I'm Black and I'm proud, and reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and how that really helped me get some awareness around the African American experience as opposed to the African experience in America. And just really reconciling the two parts of me, or the two parts of us, because we're both Africans and we're both Americans and we're both Africans and African Americans. So you'll figure that out.
Yeah. Well, we are Nigerian Americans,
right?
One of the things that I try to. We try to say is, people go, oh, you're African American. Well, Africa is a continent that has a lot of countries in it, right? And so I realize, again, as you were saying, the African American experience is because, again, from slavery and losing that history, that you knew you came from the continent of Africa, but you just didn't know, even though a lot of slaves came from northern and western parts of Africa, but because we know our heritage, right, we are Nigerian Americans, and so I just throw that in there because I tend to speak that way in terms of because in America we're so used to thinking of Africa as a continent and throwing all those people together. Right. And
you mean Africa as a country?
As a country, right. Thank you. They think of Africa as a country, and it is a continent made up of many countries.
And ethnic groups, nationalities, Absolutely. And languages. And when we say that, there is no shade on our African American side. We're not, that's not an issue. At all. It's just we have an understanding that's maybe a little different, and at the same time There are so many. I'm going to digress for a minute. There's so many things that African Americans do that have to be genetics. They just have to be genetics. I remember seeing many where we used to live, many older men sitting around with the garage doors open, having the barbecue smoker going, and they were just chatting it up while they were smoking some meats. And I thought, oh my gosh, they have no idea why they're doing that. And I can't even explain it. But I've seen this scene so many times in Nigeria. A bunch of men sitting together, a bunch of families sitting together, outside, literally would be outside, and they would be barbecuing or they'd be cooking in an open flame and just enjoying their family time together. And these are the people in the US that I'd seen doing it. Had probably never even done anything other than see Africa on a map. But here they were, just naturally every day. This is something that they would do. So God is so amazing. But with me at that time, I was really beginning to connect with what it meant to be Black in the United States for an African American, and the pain and the suffering. And that's why we brought that up. That's why I brought that up, literally. There's a very different experience of Africans who are in the US and or of Nigerian Americans or any other, name the African nation American that is second generation. And we're first generation, right? So second generation, third generation, they have a different experience than somebody who has been born and raised here from slavery. So like even our mother's experiences, right? Their natural experience. And so I wanted to understand that. I felt like it was my responsibility, just as if you were to decide today, for example, to change your citizenship and go to Portugal, you would need to learn Portuguese. You would need to learn a little bit about the country and become accustomed to the way the country, operates, right? So that's what I was doing. And I didn't know how much it would affect me. It affected me greatly. To see the pain that had continued since slavery, because I had bought the lie, because in many ways it was a lie, that after Martin Luther King Jr. died, everything was copacetic. Everything was great. The world was just positive and everybody loved everybody. And it was only to find out that that was not the case. Although I had some experiences. I had very few experiences compared to many people, for example. But at the same time, it did not mean that I needed to go as radically as I did, because not only did I embrace the Black power in a way, I also embraced feminism, because I was going to an all-women's college, which was teaching that without clarity.
Right.
I'll say they got really interested in just pushing that agenda beyond and outside of the constraints of what God had laid down as boundaries. And so I fell into their trap. And you didn't like that very much, because I was pretty mean to you.
Yeah. I remember our encounter there, and it was very militant. It was very, pushback. It was very, men are scum of the earth. Is the way that I looked at it. And, that day, my cousin and I came to visit you, and it was, for me, it was traumatic, because it was such a change from the last time I'd seen you. And so I remember leaving the campus and telling my cousin, well, that's the end of this relationship. It's not going any further. And funny, again, how the Lord works, that probably a couple of years after that, we actually got married. And before we got married, right, we had started, you had called me again, and we kind of started, dating, and you were kind of chilled a little bit oh, wow, I do actually need a guy. Well, So we started, we started dating again, and you coming to the point of getting ready to graduate, right? And you really didn't want to go back home, right? And so we were just, well, the next best thing is, why don't you move in with me? And so what was very interesting about that was you'd moved in, and I got a letter from your grandfather. And your grandfather had said, the family we come from, we don't believe in shacking up, and this is my daughter and my granddaughter. And so, unless you guys are getting married, right, you need to not have my granddaughter be living with you. And that was the first time I thought about that, even though I was at a stage in my life where, I'd been done with the party scene and all that. And I was thinking about, I'd always wanted to settle down and get married. Right. And so the letter got me thinking, I was checking the boxes, and you checked all the boxes because, again, the same way that we had a history. And so you didn't have to explain to me, right, excuse me, what the culture was and those things. The reverse was the same thing, because I thought about, how could I marry, because of my Nigerian culture, how could I marry an American woman that really has no understanding in terms of that side? So she'll never be able to connect with me on that side of who I am, right? And so it checked all the boxes, and so I decided to ask you to marry me, and we got married. And it was really the beginning of just I would say not so much quirky, but just we've just never been people that have been into a lot of fluff, and I'd say pomp and circumstance and stuff like that. And so when we decided to get married, right, we basically picked a day. And I bought the ring, and we went, a ring I paid way too much money for. But I bought it from the credit guys at $10 down and $15 a month, and it wasn't worth anything like that. But anyway, and so, and my good friend from work, he drives us down, and we go to Justice of Peace, we get married, and we get Chinese food, and we go home, and that's really our wedding day. Mm-hmm. So, any thoughts in terms of that?
Just a very interesting transition, from being a Malcolm X advocate to almost considering even, because I did one of my senior papers on the Nation of Islam, and again growing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. No disrespect, but I'm sitting there as a Nigerian American who has grown up around friends who were of various religious backgrounds, and going, what does this have to do with Islam? I'm not really sure how you connect what's being said from the stage with Islam. And okay, and realizing that there was a lot of hatred, unfortunately, and though I really appreciated the dietary laws, love those bean pies and those fish sandwiches, I recognize that I couldn't hate one ethnic group simply because of the color of their skin. Nobody comes into this world and says, oh God, make me this color. At least if we do, none of us are born remembering that we asked for a specific color. And I really don't think that's how it works. No, it doesn't. No. So it didn't make sense to me to hate anybody, regardless of what had happened historically, or regardless of even how some people were taking advantage of different people's ethnicities or color to continue to hate people because of the color of their skin, or to call them devils. So I knew that wasn't for me. I was raised by my parents to be somewhat open-minded, and there were too many books from too many different authors from too many different parts of the world that I grew around, that I grew up around, for me to then pigeonhole myself into this very space that was, okay, you're welcome, but nobody else is welcome.
Right.
And so I had to let that go. And even though the school was also very into emphasizing what women could do, what girls could do, girl power and all of that. And I appreciated that. I was raised by a father who always said, this house you're living in, guess what? It's mine. You're going to have to grow up and get your own.
Right.
And even though he was very Nigerian, his mother and father were both Nigerian. He didn't have a feminist bone in his body. In fact, he was a womanizer. Which to me says something else other than being a feminist. It was a case of recognizing God made men and God made women. And I remember Adam and Eve, because I did take religion in my high school in Nigeria. And so I couldn't go as far to the left as my school was promoting. And so I knew that I wanted a relationship, and I wasn't sure if I wanted kids, but I was sure I wanted a relationship. And at the time I was thinking, well, I'm going to graduate. And what I really want to do is I really want to go and study. I want to do a course of study. In this study, I want to do some research. And the research I want to do is to evaluate comparing ethnic health providers, meaning the witch doctor, babalawo is what we say in Yoruba, versus Western medicine, and the effectiveness of one versus the other, particularly concerning things that are issues of the soul. And so when you invited me and gave me the opportunity to move in with you, I thought that was just a short postponement on me going on to do my master's and possibly my PhD in psych, with research being my key focus. But that was actually God saving me from what would have been a trajectory that would have taken me completely away from him. And so I'm grateful that my maternal American grandfather wrote you the letter and caused you to think about checking all the boxes, or seeing if I checked the boxes, so to speak. But when I also re-examined what I would need in a relationship, for whatever reason, why this was important to me, I cannot really, words alone cannot communicate, but I think people of various ethnic groups that have ethnic foods, my life, oh my gosh, and food, can relate. I wanted to be able to eat eba and not have to explain what eba was. I wanted to be able to, if we were in a situation where I needed to send money home, to not have to explain why it is that I need to send money home. All those Africans in the diaspora, or people of other ethnic groups who are in the diaspora, sometimes face these issues where they send money home because they still have family back in their country of origin, or they're cooking foods that are odd to the American palate, and they get questioned, and why would you ever eat something like that? And I just was like, I can't deal with that.
Yeah.
Very irrational reasons to make a decision to marry somebody, but at the same time I thought at the granular level, I want there to be a level of understanding that would keep us from having that as an additional opportunity to have issues between us. So
and and I think that in us growing up and just in the environments we've been in, we've always been very multicultural. And I think that was another thing that was very important to me when I married somebody, right? Because I didn't want to marry somebody that was so locked into, right, their specific culture that they did not have the rich experience of multiculturalism, right? And so I can see even how God, after we got married, right, how we've always been able to move amongst people of different cultures very, very easily, because that's been our life. Our life has, way before we got married, our life has been multicultural. And so, again, part of the reasons why, you checked all the boxes. And so, so we get married, right? And so we get married, but all the issues, right? We've talked about some issues of war and, father, and for me, abandonment and different issues. Now we get married, right? And we bring, today people are all premarital counseling and this and that, there was none of that. And so we get married and we bring all those issues into the marriage. And we know from all the years that we've done marriage work, right, is that when you get married, of course, the love and the stars and you're walking on, air and all these things is great until you get married and the honeymoons. Now you have to do real life. And now you have to do real life. When you had issues that were just your own, they were your own issues. But when you get married, the issues that are your own now become our issues, right? And the first 10 years of our marriage we just did everything possible to try to destroy that marriage. And again, but God, right? And so, we've had addictions and infidelity and just about everything that could destroy a marriage we had in that first 10 years, and we came very close. And so, but then God steps onto the scene. So, tell your story about how God steps on the scene for you.
Well, let me say this just as a clarification, that the premarital counseling did exist when we got married.
Yes.
But we were so far from God, it didn't exist for us. We'd never heard of it. So we were the ones who were out of pocket. We were the ones who were...
We weren't even, that wasn't even in our wheelhouse or in the mindset.
Not at all. We were in the proper term, the way the term is defined originally in the dictionary. We were ignorant.
Yes.
Or ignorant, as some people would say. Didn't have a clue. True. So now we have a clue. We're in God, and we help couples, young couples who want to get married, or older couples if they want to get married, right? Kind of go through some things before actually making that decision to choose the date and all of that. To get to that place of marriage. But you're right. We brought a lot of issues. As I mentioned briefly, my father had been a womanizer. So I had made some childhood vows. I had no idea that when you make a vow that you are binding yourself to something, and it may not be a good thing. You may think it's a good thing. Where I made a vow that backfired because it was made from a bitter root of judgment, right? So, we had the whole infidelity and like you said, even just the level of anger that was in our marriage was huge. And the level of brokenness that you brought and that I brought as well. Also, having been... suffered a lot of physical abuse, and even there had been molestation and all kinds of things in our history. So fast forward to reconciliation. If you want, we can talk about that.
Okay.
So,
well, I actually wanted you to touch on your coming to Christ.
God is so awesome. It's a very detailed and long story, but I'll try to give you the short of it.
Thank you.
Because I love the long of it, but maybe that's for another day. I encountered the Lord because I had been searching. I really was searching for who was the right expression of God. And that was really because... we had come to a place where we realized that our marriage wasn't going to make it unless we brought God in.
Right.
So I started this search, and one thing I had done was I had been introduced to a lady who was actually a New Age, I'll call her guru. That's the wrong word, but she was a New Age person. And she was coaching me in how to engage more on the New Age level. But as a part of that, you're allowed to bring in different types of faiths. You're allowed to bring in different religious experiences from your past. And so she had given me crystals, and she'd given me a little medallion that represented one of the goddesses in the Yoruba pantheon. And I was supposed to use that to connect to God. And she tried to teach me how to meditate, and I wasn't very good at it. I could never get to a place where my thoughts were quiet or do the humming thing. That I just couldn't go there. So I had concurrently been watching I had concurrently been watching an evangelical TV minister. And so but I wasn't, I liked what he was saying. It sounded familiar, but there was something that I just wasn't sure about. But in that same season, I had a coworker, actually a guard where I worked, share with me a book that was about Our Lady of Guadalupe. And in the process of my reading the book, many people from that are of Mexican American descent will be able to relate to Our Lady of Guadalupe. I had an experience where I saw a vision of Mary. Because I'd gone to Catholic high school in Nigeria, I was very familiar with Mary as someone in the whole umbrella of the Catholic faith. And so when I had the vision, it was of Mary dressed as Our Lady of Guadalupe with all the colors and everything. But she said something to me 3 times that made all the difference. And she said to me, "Worship my son. Worship my son. Don't worship me, worship my son." And so from that point on, I knew that I needed to really focus on Jesus Christ. I had loved Jesus Christ growing up as a little girl. I don't know what happened where I got turned off, but I'd had a color Bible as a little girl, and I knew all the stories. But when she said that, I knew I needed to get connected with Jesus. So I left off the New Age thing. And because of the evangelical TV preacher who was on TV every Sunday, I remember praying to accept Christ in my rocking chair while he was leading. And he would always end his program with, "Get yourself to the nearest church. If you can't come here." Well, he was in another city very far away. There was no way I was going to be able to go to his church physically. So I decided, we'll go to the nearest Catholic church, which was where your parents were going. And why not? And thankfully, when I got there, they had what was called the gospel mass, where they did a African-American styled mass. It ran 2 hours instead of 1. They sang gospel worship songs, and then of course the homily and everything else. But that's where when I came to Christ, that's where I first went. And I'm grateful to God. And that's my story.
Yeah, it was quite an interesting time, as you were saying. We were at that place where if God didn't intervene, we weren't going to make it. And so I remember you being saved, and I had my own idol, which was known as the NFL. And, I was not willing to give up that idol. And for myself, we had joined a multi-level marketing company. And so on Sunday mornings, they would have a non-denominational service. You'd kind of go away for a weekend and do a conference and different things. And so I remember going to that service one Sunday and hearing the gospel very clearly for the first time, because I went to Catholic school also, but my parents were not practicing. And so hearing the gospel message for the first time and just knowing that this was what I needed, right? And so, being very young, again, didn't grow up in that household, so I went down and accepted Christ, right? But there was no discipleship, there was no nothing. And so I basically went back to my same lifestyle until you start going to Catholic church. And so followed you a little bit later than that, after that. And yes, very thankful to the Lord that Catholic church itself had a rich history, right? In terms of being able to incorporate what they call in the gospel mask, right? Very sort of evangelical sort of mixture within the which is very rare at that time in the Catholic Church. And going there and thinking that I'm serving God, and I joined the worship team, and so thinking that, okay, I went from nothing to giving God 2 hours on Sunday, and thinking that He was happy. He should be happy with that, right? And going through the first few years, and I remember getting to a place, probably going to the church 2 or 3 years at that point. And I had this encounter with the Lord saying that, okay, Lord, I've been here 3 years, and my life, although I'm enjoying it, my life really hasn't changed, right? And so unless you can show me how this is going to change, I might as well go back to my old life that I never left in the first place. And I remember God very clearly saying, well, you haven't pursued me. You've come and you've done these things thinking that you're pursuing me, but you're not, right? And I remember at that point, and I know I'm dating myself, that's when cars had cassette players. And I remember getting buying the Bible, because I wasn't a book reader, right? But I was like, okay, I could listen to the Word of God, right? And so I bought the whole Bible on cassette tape. And I can remember driving every morning, taking the kids to school, and listening to the tapes and really just weeping in the car. And the kids looking at me and like, what's going on with Dad? Something weird's happening with that. And and then I found J. Vernon McGee, right? And just, I know he's been in heaven for a long time, and Through the Bible Radio is still there. And, he takes 5 years to go through the Bible bus. But I tell people that I cut my teeth on J. Vernon McGee. And between that and Scripture, God met me and began to take me on that journey. But there was a lot of battles, a lot of demons, a lot of things that He had to take me through. But I was so grateful, because one thing that I know is that God thrives in adversity, right? And I had a lot of adversity, but God met me every step of the way. And so that began to take us on the journey of now Him doing healing and bringing us to a wholeness. And
before you get there, you kicked me out of the Catholic Church. Before you got to your journey where you were in deep with the Word and J. Vernon McGee, how firm a foundation, saints of the Lord. If you know, you know. Yeah. That's all I've got to say. But yeah, so I was still listening to other evangelical ministers that I could watch after coming home from Mass. And or found the Christian radio station and not the Catholic channel. Didn't find that one. Nobody told me about that one. And realizing that I needed to be reading my Bible. I couldn't just be relying on what the priest was saying. And in fact, our priest loved the fact that I was reading my Bible and would call that out, which I'm grateful for. But I was planting tracks in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, and that was so the one thing that
Cheap tracks at that.
So the one thing that I love about my wife is whatever she does it with passion. And so she was on fire for the Lord, and so she was trying to pass out tracts in the church and in the Catholic Church. And so I didn't think that was a good idea.
So my husband nicely invited me to go elsewhere. And actually you said, and you can take the kids with you. If you find another place, you can take the kids with you. But then what you ended up doing was you found the church that I was going to go to. And you found a church called Southgate Christian. And it was wonderful. We met my first evangelical pastor and his wife, and the kids got connected there. In fact, our son, whenever he would help with communion, to prepare communion, he would eat half the sourdough loaf. Which was not right, but
yeah, he got a lot of the bread of Jesus.
Yes, he did. A lot of the bread of Jesus. That's right. But yeah, that's how I ended up out of the Catholic Church. But then at one point later on, when my pastor at the time, Pastor Mark, left to go back to the Philippines, we merged churches with another church, which was great. There was no problem there. But I felt convicted by the Lord that I needed to go back to Catholic Church because you were still there, because we were worshiping in two different places. And my sister had said something that was really, really powerful, that the Lord used, my younger sister. And when the Lord spoke, he was clear that I just needed to be where you were, and he would deal with the rest. And he did. And when he did, it really wasn't long, because soon after that, we both had an experience in the Catholic Church where you received the conviction that we needed to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I call it our own Macedonian call, right? Because a good friend of yours that sent her daughter, and our son went to the same Christian school, invited us to her church service. And it was the first time that I'd ever seen a man on fire for Jesus. And I recognized at that point, again, that, okay, the Lord showed me, right, a picture of the next steps of where he wanted me to be. And he made it very, very clear. And I remember actually having a dream after that, literally like Paul's Macedonian call, right? It was like the pastor of that church was like, come over here and help us. Cause it was a really small church, right? It was an urban church, and people that just loved the Lord. But in a small church, definitely the pastor is doing everything himself, right?
That's right.
And I really felt that strong call that the Lord wanted me to come alongside and to help him. And so that was really our journey there. And that was really our first experience after he'd been there for a while. We remember we just wanted to be members. And he was saying, I remember one time, he was calling out leaders in the church, and he called us out, and we looked at each other and was like, we're not leaders in the church, and pastor was like, no, you are leaders in the church. And we understood what he was saying, right? He wanted to identify some people. And again, this was a God call that he saw something in us that we didn't see in ourselves, right? And a little bit after that, he had us start working with our first couples.
We did a home group.
Yes.
We did a home group. We did a home study, and it was mostly couples. There was one single person there who's still in our lives today. Shout out, June. And we actually did that, and then from there we started dealing with some couples. He assigned us some couples, and even was he saw something that we weren't picking up on it. We were just doing what we do based on how God was leading us through the word, and we ended up he wanted us to be a part of a conference on marriages that was going to be coming up, because he wanted us to do more with marriages at the church.
Yeah. And so that's really what led us into really the ministry we've done now. So really we've been doing this 25 years, I would say, maybe close to 30.
Yeah.
So again, the years, right? 30 years. And the Lord's just been grateful, just such a blessing to us, because, even at that time that the Lord had done some work in us, we had so much more work to do, right?
Yes.
And what we realized is, as we were helping other couples, right, the Lord was continuing to do a work in us. And he was faithful. And as we moved through that church, and we had a season where we sort of pulled back from ministry, and there was some different things, passing in the family, and so just sort of navigating, this walk with the Lord. It's never, people think it's, a lot of times it's sort of this smooth transition, but it's not. Right. And so many times there's seasons in our lives, right, that we go through. And so we went through a season, and the Lord brought us into a new season where he brought people into our lives that really began to teach us about relational care. And not only that, brought people in our lives that really started helping us with understanding deliverance ministry, deliverance and healing, and how all those things integrated together. And so that's really what this podcast is going to be a lot about. There's going to be a lot of different avenues that we will address, and there'll be a lot of different things that you'll hear that we'll talk about that you've probably not heard about before. And so as we're wrapping up this podcast, one of the things that we want to do in the next podcast is we're going to talk about the difference between a Christian marriage and a Christ-centered marriage. And what we mean by that is, a lot of people today have what they deem as a Christian marriage, or what's a traditional marriage. But our focus on the years that we've been doing the work is the Lord has really spoken to us about having Christ-centered marriages and what that's about. And those two are radically different. You may think they're not, but they are. And so in the next podcast, we're going to just get into that a little bit. So
let me just say this, as a part of what you're saying to everyone is that we tend to think, and I'm borrowing from a friend's quote from today, we tend to think that once we get saved, that everything will be honky-dory. Life is going to be a piece of cake. Oftentimes we apply that same romanticizing, and if I may, possibly even nostalgic thought to marriage, that when we get married, life is going to be a bed of roses. But there's a time when the bloom leaves the rose, right? You're not caught up in the infatuation of marriage. And what we must realize is that we have been born into war. When we get born again, we are born into war. We are in warfare, whether we recognize it or not. And to have a healthy marriage and to have a Christ-centered marriage, we have to also be aware that we are soldiers in the Lord's army, and that we need to bring all the things that the Word has for us to bear, even for the benefit of our marriage and for our families. And I just wanted to add that as you close out.
All right. Well, as you can see, it's going to be an interesting ride. So anyway, next time in the next podcast, we're going to talk about the differences between a Christian marriage and a Christ-centered marriage. So do us a favor, like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next podcast. Bye for now.